Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Business in Bentonville. My name is Andy Wilson, and I'm the leader of Doing Business in Bentonville, and it's so wonderful to have you here today. We have got such a great podcast lined up today because what we're going to bring a subject matter expert online, and he is going to really talk to us today about team effectiveness. And my guest today is David Gloss. David, welcome to Doing Business in Bentonville.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's so great to you joining us from all the way from Philadelphia. It's great to have you here. And I mean, what a great day it is, and from such a wonderful company. And Dave, I really want to talk about you for a minute, but I want you to talk a few minutes about this great company called AIIR Consulting. And one of our podcasts out of 6, we have 6 episodes in this podcast, in our journey here, our series we call it. I got our opportunity to spend time with your CEO, and what a great individual he is, and what a great company. Tell us about AIIR Consulting, Dave.
Oh, thanks for the nice words here and the opportunity to connect. Jonathan is great, and if you want to know about AIIR, understanding about our CEO, he's very much the lifeblood of this organization. A clinical psychologist by training. Recognize the need to connect and understand the research behind team, leader, and organizational performance. Our whole focus is about how do we build better leaders, better teams, better organizations for a better world, right? Like the more that we can anchor here to the foundations and principles that allow people to do great work, to feel fulfilled, and to know what the skills are, what the behaviors are in terms of effective leadership is meaningful. And that really anchors to how we do our work, which is focused on executive coaching, which is one-to-one, both at the leader level and down throughout the organization. When leaders are either stepping into their first time role as a leader, they've just been promoted as an individual contributor. How do I understand what it takes to lead a team or to lead a department? It's a different skill set when you go from being an accountant to being a CFO, and the opportunity to step into that. On the team effectiveness side, similarly, right? Like, the getting 1 + 1 + 1, if it equals 3, that's great. If it equals 5, it's better. If it equals 2, that's when you call AIIR and help to amplify and turn that around. Leadership development, I think that's an area where, we're seeing a lot in our research. So we do a ton of research at AIIR as it relates to what do modern leaders need today? What do modern organizations across the globe? We're a global organization. So, what are the core skills that are required, and how do you train leaders in today's world to be successful, both at, managing themselves, managing others, and leading their organizations respectively. So, we're across industries from pharma to finance and everything in between. It's been a fun ride. I've been with the org for about 5 years now. I just had my 5th anniversary, so excited to see the ride it's been on.
Well, Dave, it's so great to have you here, and I will tell you, Dave, that was a great job talking about AIIR Consulting. It is such a great company, and it's really, as Dave said, it's really about improving the effectiveness and performance of the organization, the teams, and the leaders inside that organization. Now, Dave, you're quite the expert, and I want to talk about you for a moment because.
Oh, Andy, you make me blush.
You have a big job at AIIR, and what you get the opportunity to do. And let me just tell you a bit about Dave. I want him to fill in some blanks here, but Dave is also I had the opportunity last January to visit AIIR's home office in Pittsburgh, and not
Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's that in Philadelphia. So I had the opportunity to visit AIIR in Philadelphia, their home office there. What a great facility, and spend time with many of the team members there in the organization. But Dave, you're a senior leader consultant at AIIR, and in your role, you serve on the senior leadership team, and your really focus is driving team effectiveness inside the organization. That's where you work with many organizations there. I want you to talk about that because one of the things that you do is really help companies, teams focus on effectiveness. And I want you to talk about that. But you hold an MBA of International Business from Temple University. You have a BA Political Science from Dickerson College. So, Dave, you're qualified. You've got a lot of experience. So, talk to us about what you do. What does head of team effectiveness? What do you do in a company like AIIR?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things that I do here in my role as the head of team effectiveness is to be an advocate for the practice of teaming, right? So I want to really anchor to this. I think there's a misnomer in the evolution of how organizations and companies invest in their teams or what it takes to do that. I think we all know the whole like, oh, well, let's do an offsite. We'll do a team building activity. It used to be trust falls, like all that. Like those are events, and those are very important in helping build a sense of connection and cohesion, and offer opportunities to build trust within teams. But the practice of teaming is something that I like to be akin to home ownership, right? You can build a house, you can build a team, but if you don't maintain that house, it becomes overrun, overgrown, in disrepair, right? It doesn't become a place that you want to live in or to feel like you're flourishing. And the same thing on the team. Once you build a team, you have to keep investing in the maintenance of that team. And the practice of teaming is a series of skills and behaviors that we really impart into not only our organization here at AIIR, but at our clients. So we have about 75 consultants globally serving clients from Singapore to Chicago. And what we're doing is creating these experiences and helping teams understand, how do I strengthen my culture within my team? How do I establish that culture? How do I allow it to flourish and navigate moments when strategies might change, or we bring new members of the team in, right? Because if you just invest in those event-based teaming things instead of the practice, well, how do you bring a new team member into the group? All of a sudden you have these cliques that form between in-group and out-group, between people that are more tenured and things like that. So we help create the behaviors and work with leadership teams and other teams to understand, what does it take to build that culture, and then what does it take to increase and sustain high levels of productivity. Now, those are very specific terms, culture and productivity. It's a model that we've developed at AIIR, and it's part of also my work is in driving our research initiative. We build our models and our tools and frameworks over the last 15 years, studying like hundreds of teams and organizations, thousands of leaders, and what are the characteristics that allow them to be successful, and then translating them into practical principles. So a lot of my work is how do we understand and proselytize the practice of teaming, make it accessible for folks so that any leader or team can do it, build strong cultures, high levels of productivity, but also how do we continue and keep it practical, translating all the research into things that are meaningful.
That's really exciting and so important. Now, one of the things that when I talk to subject matter experts or leaders, spend time with them, here's what they do. They say, okay, COVID was like a date. When COVID happened, we use COVID, and we know when that date. We know that date. Okay,
I was where when, right?
Yeah, right. Now people work from home or other places around and wherever. Now companies are bringing people back to work, to their offices. So what are the leadership teams dealing with the transition from you were at home for 2 years or whatever the number, and now you're back at work, you're back together some days, some days you're virtual. It's all over. So explain to me what you're right now learning and dealing with teams since COVID.
Yeah. I think there's two things that I think are important to note. One, teaming and post-COVID and hybrid is not a monolith, right? Like let's every organization is different, every industry is different values that govern it, different types of work. Like you take I work with a 125-year-old construction and engineering firm, right? You have about 15% of that workforce that are traditional white collar, and then the rest are split across contractors and union labor, and it's different for everybody. So I want to be real clear. It isn't the same for everybody, but there are some things that are emerging that are principles that are important that I think we can follow. The second piece of it is, we're not out of the woods yet. So we're at you say it's a moment in time, it's a date. We're still very early in evolving. What does this new world and new way of teaming, new way of leading look like in the post-COVID world, right? So you're talking about generational. You have the baby boomers that are now really on the far end of retiring. You have Gen X stepping into leadership roles. You have Gen Y who, all of which are kind of figuring out how did they work in a hybrid world pre-COVID, right? But then you don't even have in the digital natives or the folks that went to high school and college during COVID, right? So when they start to come in the workforce and their needs, like it's going to shift quite a bit. So I think we're in this in-between period where you're seeing a lot of organizations try and create normalcy, try and create ways in which they can enhance the performance of their teams, while also simultaneously trying to appeal to multiple generations and needs and values and styles and such. I think what we have found about the moment that we're in right now is that, again, it's not a monolith. The concentration of, and then Gartner had some great research on this that I think is important to reference. But the biggest determining factor about how do you work in the post-hybrid world centers in the team in and of itself. Giving clear principles about what you're looking for in terms of performance and goals and outcomes and outputs, but letting the team decide what's our rhythm of work, right? We've seen a lot of organizations mandate like 3 days in and they're checking badges and all that. But that doesn't help. That helps, I would say, some of the research here. You have a certain subset of managing leaders that helps them feel more in control, more accountable to performance. That like when they're badged in, they're getting work done. But that doesn't work for every group. And in those particular areas, you want to create, again, the center of power within the team. Like if you say you want them to come into the office 3 days a week, that's okay. But when you say it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, well, what if some members of the team aren't in on those days or have other things? You have somebody come in on that day and none of their team is there. Well, if the goal is to increase their sense of connection to the org and productivity, that actually diminishes it. But if you gave them the opportunity, we'd love you all to figure out over the course of the quarter, getting together in person, what's your rhythm for coming into work, and then connecting and bonding and brainstorming, decision making, like bringing in new team members. If you give them what you're hoping they do and give them the autonomy to do it, that's where you're seeing a lot more buy-in and seeing a lot of higher levels of engagement, even 2 times higher level of likelihood to stay when that autonomy rests within the team as a whole.
Well, I think you're saying some really important things there, because it really about giving them, not the influence. It gives them the inspiration to figure this out together as a team, which you want them to do, to work as a team. Let them figure this out on the front end, work together to get that done. Definitely, I can see that increases productivity, efficiencies, et cetera, that you talked about. Now, you mentioned culture earlier, and I think since we're talking about the pandemic a bit, how has culture taken a hit? You talk about that. What's happened to culture? And then with your expert thoughts on this, what's next? What should companies do and leaders do next?
Yeah. We call it the culture crash. That's really happened as a result of, the rapid forced, migration to hybrid and distance learning and things like that. where the rhythms that we grew up becoming comfortable with, and that's where I think it's important. Like when I say we, I'm talking, those that have been in the workforce pre-COVID, because we're starting to see more people coming into the workforce now that went to school during it. But I think the rhythms that we were most comfortable with or familiar with, we talk about the water cooler conversation or those weak ties and strong ties, but the weak ties that were formed, we lost the ability to do that in a digital first or hybrid first world. So you're seeing these micro cultures emerge and micro communities emerge within organizations, and they're struggling to create sort of what's our broad sense of culture. So hence the power of the team to be the conduit for the broader company culture is becoming quite important because it's quite fragmented. The other thing that's actually important too is that when you're in this post-COVID world, or if you're working for a hybrid organizations, that all of the work is done through this box, right? This screen, this moment. And that's not just the work, but it's like how you connect, right, how you get work done, how you brainstorm, how you collaborate. There's a great way of thinking about it, like a 2x2. Firstly, when under trust, under culture, you're trying to build trust and safety. You're trying to build a sense of connection, and you're trying to create the conditions for meaningful dialogue, right? To have tough conversations. If your only mechanism and mode for those exchanges is this box, and you aren't creating other rhythms for it or hoping that those tacit relationships you relied upon previously will help bridge the gap, you're going to miss out. So what we've been able to do with our research and what we're sharing with our clients is think about it. What are the moments in which you do work alone and do work together? What are the moments and situations where you do work remotely or co-located? What's most important that you do in those quadrants when you're either alone and co-located or together and apart? How do you do that? Like, where is good brainstorming supposed to happen? Right? Like, I don't know about you. And when do you get your best ideas, Andy?
Oh, listening with a group. No question.
With a group?
Yeah, with the team.
Yeah. But I love that. So for me, like when I hear things sharing, like it's when we're together. Others might be when they're in the shower or they're driving home. We lost the commute, right? Yeah. Like we lost these little moments where we get for information to settle in our minds and then for it to come back. So what we're encouraging, and this is why, again, the power of culture and the power of the team for them to shape, how do we brainstorm on this team? Mm-hmm. How and when do we make decisions, right? Like how do we use Slack or asynchronous ways of communicating to get work done? And when we come together, it's when we're going to brainstorm or we're going to make decisions or like if we're going to build teams, like, okay, let's invest in getting together in person, right? It might be quarterly or once a year or something, but how are we choosing them intentionally? That's the big jump and shift, is that organizations should become more experts at helping their people, their leaders, their teams recognize what are the practices of teaming that we need to invest in and when and how do we do them. Because otherwise the culture crash when you're just heavily relying on like, okay, it's just happening, right? We're relying on sort of just like, it just occurred. That's no longer something you can trust.
Wow, that's powerful. Now, Dave, you're really hitting on some great points here. So now as a leader there, as they're listening to you talk about culture, they're listening to you give them some great advice how to build a strong culture in that organization. What else would you say? Because we're gonna leave culture in a moment, but what else would you say to the leaders today that are listening and viewing at us about what else they should do to build a strong culture? Any other thought?
Yeah, there's a couple things that come to mind. We just put out an article not that long ago called "Crushed by the Elephant in the Room" about leadership teams in particular and how there's a lot of what we call conflict debt. This is sort of the result of the shift to hybrid and over-reliance of what I would consider traditional modes for culture building and connection building, where the moments where we can resolve issues over a happy hour or things of that nature have to be done more practically and more intentionally. Think about it, right? Like how many times have you been in a meeting and then in that meeting, we all come to a consensus or an understanding about a decision. And then later that decision has changed for some reason. There was another conversation that happened in the meeting after the meeting or something like that. That creates conflict. How do you resolve that when you're like weren't involved in it? The frustration with that moment, or when you're the perceived favoritism, right? Like, are you mindful? And this was pre-COVID, but the old I had a friend of mine who worked for a nonprofit, and he would go out with his leadership team, but the leadership team was primarily women. It's the opposite of the golf course, because what they would do is when they would go out on conferences, they would go to have a spa day, right? But he's like, I'm not participating in that. That's sort of the opposite of like the men on the golf course. It happens in all these different areas. What are the ways in which we're creating in-group and out-groups? How mindful are we of expanding the importance of in-group and the ways and modes in which we do that? There's I think it's the real big thing to kind of focus on is like, how are we creating moments to resolve conflict intentionally, have practices for that? How are we investing in, really clear sense of in-group experiences? And then, we think about the work that we've done with Carol Stryker at KPMG. She leads their deal and advisory practice. This is their mergers and acquisitions team. First woman leader of that whole department ever in the history of KPMG. We did an interview with her, and we're talking about the power of one day, investing in one day of connection with your team in person on site as the seeds for that practice of teaming. If you only have the one day and you don't build in supports or reinforce it, it'll be okay. It'll be great, but it won't be transformational in terms of your culture. So how do you pick those days, really clearly?
Okay, that's really good. That's great advice. Now, you can, just as our viewers and listeners, you can find this information at airconsulting.com, right?
Okay. Yep.
And so go on there. It's a great website, by the way. It's awesome. It's got great information on there. So you need to check that out. Now, Dave, how do you think about, team effectiveness or effective teaming? How do you think about that as you look at these teams and you look at this, what your role is inside of, AIIR Consulting is team effectiveness. So you show up, you look at the team, walk us through that.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that are important. We'll just use the AIR method. So our name isn't spelled wrong. AIIR is our method for driving sustained behavior change. And I think any leader can use this method to their advantage. Any leader, any organization. We use it when we consult, but it's something you can apply in how you evaluate where you are now, where you want to go, and what it takes to close the gap. And that first A stands for assessment. Are you gathering the necessary information about how effective you are as a leader and how effective your team is right now, and relates to the strength of its culture and the levels of its productivity? Are we able to understand at a individual level and how that informs the collective, right? So what I love is, to measure the effectiveness of your team, you have to know its tendencies, right? Like, if we're a comfortable team, which is we can measure that at AIR. We have our team effectiveness survey to do that. And we can find out, like, are we a comfortable team? That's one where you have really strong culture, but low levels of productivity. Like, we've all been on a team like this where we're like, at the end of a meeting, everybody's excited, high five, and we did it, right? Well, who has the ball and when is it due? Right? Like, those are things I think are, we've all experienced, and it can become frustrating for high performers that are like, come on, let's get movement here. So, that can be a symptom of a concentration of conflict averse people, right? So do you know what your natural, conflict styles are within a team, or do you understand what are the shared values within a team? Those things can be quite important to find out the meaningful insights. That's this first I of AIR, like that. How do we operate as a team? What's our context? there's if you might be familiar with like the Tuckman model, right? The forming, storming, norming, performing, right? So where getting a sense of where are we on this journey? Because you might be having some conflict, but if we're still early on, we're like, okay, we're storming. What do we want to do? What do we want to know about ourselves to help us, work through? To then ultimately choose where do we want to focus to enhance our effectiveness? What do we want to implement? The second I within it. So AIIR, assessment, insight, implementation. Like, what do we want to implement to help increase our effectiveness and ultimately reinforce? Our work in the practice of teaming is helping teams shorten that storming and norming phase to get to performing quickly and ultimately reinforce that practice as they grow. So when you think about the effectiveness of teams, great teams know their purpose, why they exist. They know how they navigate conflict and make big decisions. They have a sense of connection and a sense of understanding of what matters to each other personally and how those shared values inform the way they do work. And they invest in understanding their stakeholders. Who are we to others, and how does that inform the ways that we work over time? Great high-performing teams are ones that invest in helping understand where they are now, where they're going, how close the gap, and investing in those little practices, defining their purpose, how they operate, etc., in order to really reinforce that.
You've just shared with us a great example and a process, an assessment on what every leader wants, and that's a high-performing team. Every leader wants that. They want a team that is focused. They want a team that knows roles clearly. The roles and responsibilities are clear. They want a team that's effective. They want a team that everything you just said, that's what they want. And what I heard, and you have an assessment process that gets to those questions, and you help then to navigate the future to develop that team to that effectiveness. Is that?
Yeah. I think you hit on it really well. I think what we've been able to do is, through our research, is make it practical. So, my past life, I worked for a couple of venture-backed tech startups and took them to acquisition. I was a member of the leadership team within them, and we had some great consultants join our work at the time and help do some of that individual personality assessment and team assessment, help us get clear on our purpose and how we operate. One of the things that I found was when we didn't use them, right, we didn't work with them, our runway, like it took us forever to get clear on who we were, how we wanted to operate, and to get that real sense of high performance. But when we did work with them and do the assessment and invest in slowing down, defining our purpose, defining our roles, defining our values, defining how we have conflict and rumble on difficult issues, our ability to take something that would normally take 18 months of organic gelling and boil it down into 3 months was so meaningful. It's what inspired me to do the work that we do. And that's exactly it. Like, and we do it in a way that either you can work with us to do it for you, or we can train your internal HR people to do it on behalf of your organization. But we try and do it in a way that like it's practical, accessible, human, but also highly reliable.
Wonderful. Wow, that's really good, and it's great. And I would tell you, I would encourage team leaders today. You're on a team, and you don't believe your team is this level, or there's opportunities. You need to reach out to Dave at airconsulting.com. You need to look at their website. You need to see and go through and look at all the things that they do. And Dave, you've been excellent. This has been such a great conversation. And as we wrap things up, what else would you say to our viewers and listeners today around team effectiveness? Anything else that's going on that you look at, if you want to look forward, what are opportunities that teams may run into, challenges, things like that? Anything like that to help us as we wrap? This has been
I think the important thing is to know that we're playing an infinite game, right? Like we sometimes apply finite principles to this infinite game, like we're going to be the best, yeah, but for how long, right? Like so, change is perennial. like situations and context evolve. So as you're a leader, you might reach that high performing level, but guess what? There's something right around the corner. The next Gen AI, something's going to happen. We haven't even talked about how Gen AI is going to be incorporated into how teams organize themselves and operate, et cetera. Like that's the next horizon. So, take on that learner mindset, be open to what's going on, try your best. Nobody has it perfect. There are principles. Everything we talked about today are principles and models to help you get the best outcome for your team and what's going on in your world. But I think anticipate that change is perennial and to know that you can do your best. You can find partners like AIIR or HR leaders within your org or talent leaders or great podcast hosts like Andy here that have kind of come before you and that have seen some things that can help inform you and help you make the best choices. But, you're going to have many more at bats because there's lots more coming down the pike.
Well, you've done an excellent job, Dave. I'm so happy that you've been able to join us. I'm so excited about this AIIR series that we're doing, where it's just excellent content. And Dave, you're the senior leader consultant at AIIR Consulting. Your focus has been around teams and team effectiveness. So thank you so much for joining us, Dave. You've done a great job. I'd love to have you back. I'd love to have AIIR back so we can keep this going, because now what we have to do is come back and talk about what you said we haven't talked about yet, and that's the future, and we need to talk about that because I think that's going to really make some significant change and adjustments to teams going forward.
Excellent. I appreciate it, my friend. Thank you, and we'd love to keep the conversation going.
Okay, let's do it. All right. Thank you again, Dave. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Again, my name is Andy Wilson. You've been tuned into Doing Business in Bentonville, and with my co-host, my co-host Dave Fox with AIIR Consulting. So again, Dave, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.